The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal courtyard as Captain Adrian stepped out of his quarters for what he believed would be another ordinary day. He had served the royal guard for 7 years, and in all that time, not once had anyone questioned his loyalty or dedication. His record was spotless, his service exemplary, and his fellow guards respected him deeply, but today was different. Today, everything would change. The trouble began when Captain Adrian noticed unusual activity near the barracks. Guards were moving. In formation, their faces serious and focused. Something was happening, but nobody would tell him what. He approached his closest friend among the guards, hoping to get some answers. "What's going on?" Adrian asked, but his friend just looked away uncomfortably. "I can't talk about it," came the quiet reply. "You'll find out soon enough." Adrian felt a strange knot forming in his stomach. In 7 years of service, he had never been kept in the dark about palace security matters. As one of the senior captains, he usually knew about everything that happened within these walls. Minutes later, a group of armed guards approached him. Their leader, a stern-faced sergeant, spoke in a formal tone that Adrian had never heard directed at him before. "Captain Adrian, you are to come with us immediately. There are serious allegations that require investigation." "Allegations? What kind of allegations?" Adrian asked, genuinely confused. "That will be explained to you shortly. Please do not resist." Adrian had no choice but to follow them. As they walked through the palace corridors, he noticed other guards staring at him. Some looked shocked, others appeared angry, and a few seemed sad. The whispers started almost immediately. They led him to his own quarters, where a thorough search was already underway. Palace officials were going through his belongings, examining every corner of his room. Adrian watched in growing alarm as they pulled apart his careful organization, scattering his possessions across the floor. "What are you looking for?" he demanded. "I have nothing to hide." The lead investigator, a cold man with calculating eyes, didn't answer immediately. He continued supervising the search until one of his assistants called out from near Adrian's wardrobe. "Sir, we found something." Adrian's heart sank as he watched the assistant pull out a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be his own cloak. The investigator unwrapped it carefully, revealing several gleaming sapphires that Adrian had never seen before in his life. "Those aren't mine," Adrian said immediately. "I've never seen those jewels before. Someone must have planted them there." The investigator held up one of the sapphires to the light. "These are from the Queen's personal collection. They were reported missing 3 days ago from her private chambers." Adrian felt the blood drain from his face. The Queen's jewels? This was impossible. He had never even been inside the Queen's private chambers, let alone stolen from them. "This is a mistake," Adrian insisted. "I would never steal from the royal family. I've dedicated my life to serving them, but the evidence was damning." The jewels were found in his room, wrapped in his own cloak. To make matters worse, the investigators discovered that Adrian had been on duty in the palace wing where the Queen's chambers were located on the night the jewels went missing. "I was doing my regular patrol," Adrian explained desperately. "I never entered her chambers. I never even saw these jewels before today." The investigator made notes on his parchment, his expression unchanging. "That will be for the court to decide. Captain Adrian, you are hereby stripped of your rank and placed under arrest for theft of royal property." Word of Adrian's arrest spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered in corners, guards exchanged shocked glances, and court officials shook their heads in disappointment. How could someone they had trusted for so long betray that trust so completely? The law was clear about crimes against the royal family. Before any trial could take place, the accused had to face public humiliation in the town square. It was an old tradition, designed to show the people that no one was above justice, not even those who served in the palace. Adrian spent the night in a cold cell, trying to make sense of what had happened. He replayed the events of the past few days in his mind, searching for any clue about how those jewels had ended up in his room, but he came up with nothing. His service record was perfect, his loyalty unquestioned until now, and he had no enemies that he knew of. The next morning, they came for him. A group of guards, some of whom had once been his friends, escorted him through the palace gates and into the city streets. Word had already spread to the townspeople, and crowds were beginning to gather along the route to the town square. As they walked, Adrian could hear the angry voices of the citizens. Many of them knew him by sight, having seen him during his duties protecting the royal family at public events. Their disappointment and anger were obvious. How could he do such a thing? One woman called out, "7 years of service, and this is how he repays the crown?" Shouted another. The town square was packed with hundreds of people by the time they arrived. A platform had been erected in the center, and the crowd pressed forward eagerly to get a better view. This was entertainment for them, a break from their daily routines. Adrian was led onto the platform, where the executioner's assistant waited with his tools. The man was large and intimidating, with arms like tree trunks and a face that showed no emotion. He had performed this ritual many times before. From her position on the raised platform reserved for palace officials, Commander Elena watched the proceedings. She had trained Adrian herself when he first joined the guard. She had watched him grow from an eager young recruit into one of their most dependable captains. Even now, faced with the evidence against him, she found it hard to believe he was capable of such betrayal. Elena had seen many good soldiers fall from grace over the years, but this felt different. Adrian had never shown any signs of greed or disloyalty. He lived simply, saved his money, and sent most of his earnings back to his elderly parents in the countryside. The idea that he would risk everything for a handful of jewels, no matter how valuable, didn't fit with the man she thought she knew. The crowd grew louder as the executioner's assistant began his work. According to tradition, the accused had to be stripped of all signs of rank and status before the people. Every piece of his uniform had to be removed, symbolically taking away everything that connected him to his former position. Adrian stood as straight as he could manage, trying to maintain his dignity despite the humiliation. He looked out over the sea of angry faces and wondered how his life had come to this point. Just yesterday, these same people had looked at him with respect and gratitude. Now they called for his disgrace. The assistant worked methodically, cutting away pieces of Adrian's uniform with a sharp knife. First went his captain's insignia, the symbols of rank he had earned through years of faithful service. Then his belt, his boots, and piece by piece, everything that marked him as a member of the royal guard. With each item removed, the crowd's excitement grew. They cheered and shouted, throwing pieces of rotten fruit and calling out insults. Adrian tried to block out their voices and focus on maintaining his composure, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Commander Elena watched from the platform, her expression carefully neutral. Inside, however, she was troubled. Something about this entire situation felt wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The evidence was clear enough, but her instincts told her there was more to this story than met the eye. As the last pieces of Adrian's clothing were cut away, the crowd reached a fever pitch of excitement. But then something unexpected happened. That would change everything. Something that would make Commander Elena question everything she thought she knew about that day, and about the past she thought she had left behind forever. The executioner's assistant raised his knife for the final cut, preparing to remove the last piece of Adrian's clothing. The crowd had reached a fever pitch, their voices echoing off the stone buildings surrounding the square. Men, women, and children pressed forward, eager to witness the complete humiliation of the fallen guard. Adrian closed his eyes, trying to prepare himself for what was coming. He had already endured so much shame, but this final moment would be the worst. In a few seconds he would stand completely exposed before hundreds of people who once respected him. The thought made his stomach turn. Commander Elena watched from the platform, her hands gripping the wooden railing so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Something deep inside her screamed that this was wrong, but she couldn't interfere with the legal process. As a commander, she had to follow protocol, even when every instinct told her otherwise. The assistant's blade sliced through the final piece of fabric, and it fell to the wooden platform with a soft thud. For a moment the crowd's roar continued. at full volume, then suddenly the noise began to fade. People in the front rows had seen something that made them gasp and point. The gasps spread through the crowd, like ripples in a pond. Those who couldn't see clearly pushed forward, trying to get a better view. Others stood on their tiptoes or climbed onto crates and barrels. The excited shouting gradually turned into confused murmurs. Adrian stood with his back to most of the crowd, facing the platform where the palace officials sat. He didn't understand why the atmosphere had suddenly changed. The jeering and insults had stopped, replaced by whispers and strange, hushed conversations. Commander Elena had been looking down at her hands, trying to give Adrian some small measure of privacy during his final humiliation. But the change in the crowd's behavior made her look up. When she did, her entire world shifted. There, clearly visible across Adrian's back, was a tattoo unlike anything she had ever expected to see again. It covered most of his spine, from his shoulders down to his lower back. The design was intricate and beautiful, made up of intertwining symbols that seemed to flow into each other like water. But it wasn't the artistry that made Elena's blood run cold. It was what the symbols meant. The tattoo was the mark of the Shadow Brotherhood, a secret organization that had existed within the Royal Guard decades ago. Elena knew this because she bore the exact same mark on her own back, hidden beneath her uniform where no one could see it. Elena's mind raced as she stared at the impossible sight before her. The Shadow Brotherhood had been destroyed 23 years ago, when she was barely 19 years old. She had watched her brothers and sisters in the organization die one by one during a night of terror that still haunted her dreams. The Brotherhood had been more than just an elite unit within the Royal Guard. They were protectors of ancient secrets, guardians of knowledge that could shake the very foundations of the kingdom. Only 12 people had ever been chosen to receive the mark, and Elena had believed for over 2 decades that she was the sole survivor. The crowd's confusion was growing by the minute. Most people had no idea what the tattoo meant, but they could sense that something significant was happening. Palace officials on the platform were whispering urgently among themselves, and Commander Elena had gone completely pale. "What is that?" "Mark?" someone in the crowd called out. "I've never seen anything like it," another voice added. The executioner's assistant looked confused as well. He had performed this ritual many times before, but he had never seen a reaction quite like this. He glanced up at Commander Elena, waiting for instructions on how to proceed. Elena's mind was spinning with questions and memories. How was this possible? Adrian would have been just a child when the Shadow Brotherhood was destroyed. There was no way he could have received the mark during that time. Yet there it was, as clear and detailed as her own. The tattoo wasn't something that could be faked or replicated easily. The symbols were sacred, known only to the Brotherhood members themselves. The process of creating the mark required special inks and techniques that had been lost when the organization was destroyed. Or so Elena had thought. She remembered the night of the massacre as if it had happened yesterday. The Brotherhood had discovered something terrible, a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the royal court. They had been meeting in secret, planning how to expose the truth and protect the crown. But somehow, their enemies had learned of their plans. The attack had come without warning. Elite soldiers, more skilled than any regular guards, had stormed their hidden meeting place. Elena had only survived because she had been late to the gathering, arriving just in time to see the building in flames and hear the screams of her dying friends. For years afterward, she had investigated the massacre in secret, trying to find out who had ordered it and why. But the trail had always gone cold, and eventually she had been forced to accept that the truth might never come to light. She had hidden her own identity as a Brotherhood member and worked her way up through the ranks of the regular guard, always watching and waiting for any sign that the conspiracy still existed. Now, staring at Adrian's back, she wondered if everything she thought she knew about that terrible night was wrong. The crowd was getting restless. They had come to see a public humiliation, but instead they were witnessing something they didn't understand. Some people were starting to leave, disappointed by the unexpected turn of events. Others remained, Curious about what would happen next, Elena realized she had to act quickly. If she didn't do something soon, questions would be asked that she wasn't prepared to answer. The last thing she wanted was for other palace officials to start investigating the meaning of Adrian's tattoo. "Stop the proceedings," she announced suddenly, her voice carrying clearly across the square. The executioner's assistant froze, his hand halfway to his tools. The crowd turned to look at her, confused by the unexpected interruption. "Commander." "Elena," one of the other officials called out, "what's the meaning of this?" "The ceremony must be completed according to law." Elena's mind raced as she tried to think of a plausible excuse. She couldn't reveal the true reason for her intervention, without exposing herself and potentially putting both her and Adrian in danger. "I've just received word of new evidence in this case," she said, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. "Until this evidence can be properly examined, I'm ordering a temporary halt to these proceedings." This was a lie. Of course, there was no new evidence. But Elena knew that the law allowed for such interruptions if significant new information came to light during a trial or punishment. The crowd groaned in disappointment. They had been expecting to see the full ceremony completed, and now they were being told they would have to wait. Some people started shouting complaints, but the palace guards quickly moved to maintain order. Adrian, still standing exposed on the platform, looked completely bewildered. He had no idea what was happening or why the commander had suddenly intervened. Part of him felt grateful for the reprieve, but another part worried that this unexpected development might make his situation even worse. Elena ordered the guards to cover Adrian and escort him to a secure holding area. As they wrapped a cloak around him and led him away from the platform, she caught his eye for just a moment. The confusion and fear she saw there reminded her of her own feelings on the night the Brotherhood had been destroyed. As the crowd slowly dispersed, grumbling about the incomplete ceremony, Elena remained on the platform, her mind churning with possibilities. She had bought herself some time, but she knew it wouldn't last long. Soon, she would have to explain her actions to her superiors, and she would need a better story than the one she had just told. More importantly, she needed to talk to Adrian. She needed to find out how he had come to bear the mark of the Shadow Brotherhood, and whether his appearance in her life was a coincidence or something far more dangerous. The answers to these questions could change everything she thought she knew about the past, and possibly determine the future of the kingdom itself. The stone walls of the holding cell felt cold against Adrian's back as he sat on the narrow bench, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The rough cloak they had given him provided little warmth, but it was better than being completely exposed. His mind kept returning to that moment on the platform when everything had suddenly changed. He had heard the crowd's reaction, felt the shift in their energy, but he still didn't understand what had caused it. All he knew was that Commander Elena had stopped the ceremony for reasons she hadn't explained. Now he sat alone in this cell, waiting for answers that might never come. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor outside his cell. Adrian looked up as Commander Elena appeared, accompanied by 2 guards. Her face was serious, but there was something different in her eyes. Instead of the cold professionalism he had expected, he saw something that looked almost like concern. "Leave." "Yes," Elena ordered the guards. "I need to speak with the prisoner alone." The guards exchanged glances but followed orders, their footsteps fading as they retreated down the hallway. Elena waited until she was certain they were gone before turning her attention to Adrian. "I need to ask you some questions," she began, her voice quieter than usual. "And I need you to answer them honestly, no matter how strange they might seem." Adrian nodded, though he felt confused by her tone. "I'll tell you whatever you want to know. I've got nothing to hide." Elena pulled a small stool closer to the cell bars and sat down. She studied Adrian's face carefully, as if searching for something specific. "Tell me about your past. Before you joined the Royal Guard, where did you come from?" "You already know all this," Adrian replied, puzzled. "It's in my service records. I came from the mountain village of Westfall. My parents are farmers there." "No," Elena said firmly. "I mean before that." "Your earliest Memories. Tell me about the first things you can remember. Adrian frowned, trying to understand why she was asking such an odd question. What does that have to do with the stolen jewels? Just answer the question, please. Adrian thought for a moment, reaching back into his memory. I remember waking up in the monastery at Hillcrest. Brother Thomas was taking care of me. I was very sick with fever, and I couldn't remember much of anything. The monks said I had been found on their doorstep, barely alive. Elena leaned forward. Her interest clearly piqued. How old were you then? About 15, I think. Maybe 16. It's hard to say exactly because I couldn't remember my own birthday. Adrian paused, studying Elena's intense expression. Why are you asking about this? What did the monks tell you about how you got there? Not much. They said a merchant had found me collapsed on the road during a terrible storm. He brought me to them because I was burning up with fever and talking nonsense. They thought I might die. Elena's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. What kind of nonsense? Do you remember what you were saying? Adrian shook his head slowly. Brother Thomas mentioned it once. He said I kept talking about protecting the royal family, about duties and oaths. He thought the fever was making me. Imagine I was a knight or something. And you had no memories before that? Nothing at all? Nothing clear. Sometimes I get flashes of images, like pieces of dreams, but they never make sense. There's always fire, and people screaming, and this feeling like I'm supposed to be somewhere else helping someone. Adrian looked down at his hands. The monks said that was normal after such a serious illness. They told me not to worry about the past and to focus on building a future. Elena was quiet for a long time, processing what she had heard. Finally, she stood up and moved closer to the cell bars. Adrian, I need to tell you something, but first I need to see your back again. My back? Why? There's something there that I need to examine more closely. Something that might explain a lot about what's happening to you. Adrian hesitated. He was already embarrassed about being seen by so many people in the town square. But Elena's tone was serious, and he sensed this was important. Turn around, Elena said softly. Adrian stood and turned his back to her, letting the cloak fall away. Elena pulled a small candle closer to the bars, studying the intricate tattoo that covered his spine. She traced the air above the design with her finger, following patterns that were deeply familiar to her. Do you remember getting this tattoo? She asked. What tattoo? Adrian tried to look over his shoulder but couldn't see what she was talking about. You have a large tattoo covering most of your back. It's very detailed, very old by the look of it. Adrian felt his stomach drop. That's impossible. I've never had a tattoo in my life. I would remember something like that. Elena stepped back, her mind racing. This confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Adrian had no memory of receiving the Shadow Brotherhood mark, which meant it had been done before whatever event had wiped his memories clean. Adrian, I'm going to tell you something that will sound incredible, but I need you to listen carefully. Elena sat back down on the stool. That tattoo on your back is the mark of an organization called the Shadow Brotherhood. It was a secret group within the Royal Guard that existed many years ago. I've never heard of any Shadow Brotherhood. Most people haven't. It was destroyed over 20 years ago, when you would have been just a child. But the thing is, only 12 people ever received that mark, and I believe they were all dead. Adrian turned back around, pulling the cloak around himself. You believed? How do you know so much about this organization? Elena hesitated, then made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She stood up and began unlacing her own uniform jacket, because I was one of them. Adrian watched in amazement as Elena removed her jacket and turned around, showing him her own back. There, identical to his own, was the same intricate tattoo covering her spine. This is impossible, Adrian whispered. How can we both have the same mark? Elena faced him again, her expression grave. That's what I'm trying to figure out. The Shadow Brotherhood was created to protect the royal family from threats that ordinary guards couldn't handle. We were trained from childhood, given special knowledge, and sworn to secrecy. The tattoo was our bond, our symbol of commitment, but I was never trained from childhood. I don't have any special knowledge? Are you sure about that? Elena asked. Think about your time in the Royal Guard. Did you ever notice that you were better at certain things than you should have been? Fighting techniques that seemed to come naturally? An instinct for danger that saved lives? Adrian thought about this. It was true that he had always been exceptionally good at combat, even from his first day of training. His instructors had been amazed at how quickly he learned advanced techniques, and there had been several times when he had sensed threats, before anyone else, preventing attacks on the royal family that might have succeeded otherwise. I just thought I was naturally gifted, he said slowly. Those aren't natural gifts, Adrian. Those are the result of years of specialized training. Training that you received before your memories were wiped. The implications of Elena's words began to sink in. You're saying I was one of these Shadow Brotherhood members? But I was just a child when they were destroyed. The youngest member was recruited at age 12. If you're about 23 now, you would have been the right age. Elena leaned forward again. Adrian, I think you survived the massacre that killed the others. But somehow your memories were erased and you were hidden away until it was safe. Hidden by who? And why? That's what we need to find out. Because if you're really one of the lost members of the Shadow Brotherhood, then everything about this situation is different than it appears. Elena stood up, her mind already working on the next steps. The stolen jewels, your arrest, even this public humiliation, I think it's all connected to who you really are. Someone wanted you exposed, wanted that tattoo seen. The question is why Adrian felt overwhelmed by these revelations. Everything he thought he knew about himself was being turned upside down. So you think I'm innocent? That I didn't steal those jewels? I think you're being used as a pawn in a much larger game, Elena replied. And I think the people responsible are the same ones who destroyed the Shadow Brotherhood all those years ago. She moved toward the cell door, then paused. I'm going to investigate this further, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Adrian looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't expected. Hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone believed in his innocence. Yes, he said. Simply, I trust you. As Elena left the cell, both of them knew that they were about to embark on a dangerous journey into the past. The truth they uncovered might save Adrian's life, but it could also put them both in mortal danger. The forces that had destroyed the Shadow Brotherhood once were still out there, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill again to protect their secrets. Elena spent the entire night in the palace archives, surrounded by dusty books and forgotten records. Her official reason for being there was to review old security protocols, but her real purpose was far more dangerous. She was searching for any trace of information about the Shadow Brotherhood and the night that had changed her life forever. The archives were kept in the deepest part of the palace, far from the main corridors where servants and guards might overhear sensitive conversations. Tall shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with documents dating back hundreds of years. Most of these records had never been properly organized, making Elena's search incredibly difficult. She started with the official reports from 23 years ago, looking for any mention of the massacre that had destroyed her organization. What she found surprised her. According to the palace records, there had been no massacre at all. The reports simply stated that several guards had been reassigned to distant posts, and a few others had resigned from service. Elena knew this was a lie. She had seen the bodies of her friends with her own eyes. She had smelled the smoke from the burning building where they had died. Yet according to the official history, none of it had ever happened. This discovery made her more determined than ever to find the truth. She dug deeper into the records, looking for any documents that mentioned unusual activity during that time period. After hours of searching, she found something that made her blood run cold. Hidden among routine administrative papers was a series of coded messages between higher-ranking palace officials. The codes were old and complex, but Elena had learned to read them during her time in the Shadow Brotherhood. As she translated the messages, a terrifying picture began to emerge. The Shadow Brotherhood hadn't been destroyed because they were traitors or criminals. They had been eliminated because they had discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep secret. The coded messages revealed a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of the royal court, according to the documents. A group of nobles had been planning to overthrow the king and replace him with a ruler they could control. The Shadow Brotherhood had learned about this plot and were preparing to expose it when they were attacked. The massacre had been carried out by hired assassins, not regular palace guards. Elena felt sick as she read the names involved in the conspiracy. Some of these people were still alive, still holding positions of power within the palace. They had been walking among her for years, pretending to be loyal servants of the crown while secretly plotting against it, but the most shocking discovery was yet to come. As Elena continued reading, she found references to a surviving member of the Shadow Brotherhood who had been captured but not killed. The documents described how this person's memories had been wiped using ancient techniques. Then the survivor had been hidden away until they could be useful again. The plan had been brilliant in its cruelty. Instead of simply killing the last Brotherhood member, the conspirators had turned him into a weapon they could use against the royal family when the time was right. They had kept Adrian alive but erased his identity, then placed him in a position where he could be framed for crimes against the crown. Elena realized that Adrian's arrest was just the beginning. The stolen jewels were meant to establish him as a criminal in the public mind. Once that was accomplished, the conspirators would have him commit a much more serious crime, an assassination attempt against the king himself. The upcoming coronation ceremony was the perfect opportunity. Thousands of people would be gathered in one place, including foreign dignitaries and important nobles. If Adrian could be manipulated into attacking the king during such a public event, it would create chaos that the conspirators could use too. Seize power. Elena's hands shook as she read the final documents. The plan was already in motion. Adrian's public humiliation had been the first step, designed to make people angry and confused. Soon, there would be another incident that would make his guilt seem obvious to everyone. She had to warn someone. But who could she trust? The conspiracy involved people at the highest levels of the palace hierarchy. For all she knew, her own superiors might be part of it. If she went to the wrong person, both she and Adrian would be dead before morning. Elena gathered the most important documents and hid them in a secret pocket sewn into her uniform. She needed to get back to Adrian and tell him what she had discovered, but first she had to be careful not to attract attention to herself. As she made her way through the palace corridors, Elena noticed that there seemed to be more guards than usual on patrol. Their movements appeared random, but she could see the pattern. They were watching specific areas, including the route to the cells where Adrian was being held. Elena took a longer path, using service quarters and back staircases that most people didn't know about. Her years of experience in palace security served her well as she avoided the extra guards and made her way to the lower levels. When she reached Adrian's cell, she found him awake and pacing. He looked up hopefully when he heard her footsteps, then grew concerned when he saw the worried expression on her face. "What did you find?" he asked immediately. Elena looked around carefully to make sure they were alone before pulling out the documents she had taken from the archives. "The situation is worse than I thought. You're not just being framed for theft, you're being set up for something much more serious." She quickly explained what she had discovered about the conspiracy and the plan to use Adrian as an assassin. Adrian listened in growing horror as she described how his memories had been wiped and how he had been manipulated for years without knowing it. "So everything about my life has been a lie?" Adrian asked when she finished. "Not everything. Your dedication to protecting the royal family is real. That's part of your original training that they couldn't completely erase. But yes, most of what you remember has been carefully constructed to serve their purposes." Adrian sat down heavily on his bench, trying to process this information. "If they can control my memories, how do I know they can't still control my actions? What if I really do try to hurt the king?" "That's what we need to figure out," Elena replied. "The memory techniques they used are powerful, but they're not perfect. The fact that you're questioning everything shows that your true self is still fighting to surface. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching from down the corridor. Elena quickly hid the documents and moved away from the cell bars, pretending to conduct a routine inspection. 3 guards appeared, led by Captain Rodriguez, one of Elena's fellow commanders. His face was grim as he approached them. "Commander Elena, I've been looking for you." "Lord Chancellor wants to see you immediately." Elena felt her heart skip a beat. The Lord Chancellor was one of the most powerful people in the palace, and according to the documents she had just read, he might be involved in the conspiracy. "What does he want to discuss?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "He didn't say, but he seemed quite urgent about it." Elena knew she had no choice but to go with them. Refusing would only create suspicion, but as she followed Captain Rodriguez and his guards through the palace corridors, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. Behind them, Adrian watched through the bars of his cell as Elena disappeared from view. He had seen the fear in her eyes, even though she had tried to hide it. Now he was alone again, but this time he understood the true scope of the danger they were both facing. The people responsible for destroying the Shadow Brotherhood were still out there, still plotting against the royal family. They had already shown they were willing to kill anyone who got in their way. If they suspected that Elena had discovered their plan, her life was in immediate danger. Adrian began pacing his cell again, his mind racing with possibilities. He might not remember his training, but he could feel something stirring deep inside him. Instincts and knowledge that the memory wipe hadn't been able to completely destroy. The coronation ceremony was only 2 days away. If Elena was right about the conspiracy, that meant they had very little time to stop whatever was going to happen. But first, they had to survive the next few hours. And Adrian was beginning to suspect that the conspirators weren't going to wait much longer before making their next move. As if summoned by his thoughts, he heard more footsteps approaching his cell. But these weren't the measured steps of palace guards. These footsteps belonged to people who were trying to move quietly, people who didn't want to be seen. Adrian moved to the back of his cell and waited, every muscle in his body tense with anticipation. Whatever was coming, he would be ready for it. The Shadow Brotherhood training that lay buried in his subconscious was beginning to awaken, and with it came skills that his enemies had hoped would never surface again. The footsteps grew closer to Adrian's cell, but something about them felt different from the usual guard patrols. These people were trying to stay quiet, moving with the careful precision of trained killers. Adrian pressed himself against the back wall of his cell, his body tensing as buried instincts began to surface. 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the corridor, dressed in dark clothing that allowed them to blend into the darkness. They weren't palace guards. Their gear was too sophisticated, their movements too practiced. These were professional assassins, sent to eliminate a problem before it could grow any larger. The leader of the group produced a set of keys and began unlocking Adrian's cell door. "Time to go," he whispered to his companions. "Make it look like he tried to escape." But as the cell door swung open, something unexpected happened. Adrian's body moved before his conscious mind could catch up, muscle memory taking over where his erased memories had failed. His training as a Shadow Brotherhood member might have been buried, but it hadn't been destroyed. Adrian rolled to the side as the first assassin entered the cell, avoiding the blade that would have pierced his heart. In one fluid movement, he grabbed the assassin's wrist and twisted, causing the man to drop his weapon with a cry of pain. The other 2 assassins rushed forward, but Adrian was already moving. Years of forgotten training guided his actions as he fought with skills he didn't remember learning. He struck pressure points that disabled his attackers instantly, used leverage to throw men twice his size, and moved with the deadly grace of someone who had been born to fight. Within moments, all 3 assassins lay unconscious on the floor of his cell. Adrian stood over them, breathing hard and staring at his own hands in amazement. He had no memory of learning how to fight like that, yet his body had known exactly what to do. Meanwhile, Elena was being escorted through the palace corridors toward the Lord Chancellor's private chambers. The guards around her seemed tense, and she noticed that they were taking a route that avoided the main hallways where other people might see them. As they approached the Lord Chancellor's door, Elena made a decision that would save both her life and Adrian's. Instead of entering the chamber, she suddenly broke away from her escorts and ran toward the nearest staircase. "Stop her!" one of the guards shouted, but Elena was already moving. Her years of training served her well as she sprinted through the palace. Taking shortcuts that only someone with her experience would know, she burst into the royal throne room, where King William was meeting with his advisors about the upcoming coronation ceremony. The sudden interruption caused everyone to turn in surprise. "Your Majesty," Elena gasped, still out of breath from her escape. "I have urgent information about a plot against your life." The Lord Chancellor, who had been sitting at the king's right hand, stood up with a look of surprise that seemed just a little too perfect. "Commander Elena, what is the meaning of this?" "You were supposed to be meeting with me." "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Elena replied, pulling out the documents she had hidden in her uniform. "Your Majesty, there is a conspiracy within these very walls. The man we arrested for stealing the royal jewels is actually a victim, not a criminal." King William studied Elena's face carefully. He had known her for years and trusted her judgment completely. "Explain yourself, Commander." Elena quickly told the king everything she had discovered about the Shadow Brotherhood, the massacre that had destroyed them, and the plan to use Adrian as an unwitting assassin during the coronation. As she spoke, she watched the faces of everyone in the room, looking for signs of guilt or recognition. The Lord Chancellor's expression grew darker with each word Elena spoke. "These are serious accusations, Commander. Do you have any proof of this supposed conspiracy?" Elena handed the coded documents to the king. "These were hidden in the palace archives, Your Majesty. They detail the entire plot, including the names of everyone involved." King William examined the documents carefully, his face growing grave as he read. The codes were old, but he had learned to read them as part of his royal education. What he saw confirmed Elena's worst fears. "Lord Blackwood," the king said quietly, using the Lord Chancellor's formal name, "these documents have your signature on them." Lord Blackwood's mask of innocence finally slipped. In an instant, his friendly demeanor was replaced by cold calculation. "You should have minded your own business, Elena. The Shadow Brotherhood was destroyed for good reason, and now you'll join them." He signaled to the guards who had escorted Elena to the throne room. But instead of following his orders, they remained motionless. Elena had chosen her moment well. These were guards she knew personally, men who were loyal to the crown above. "All else. The game is over, Blackwood," King William said, standing up from his throne. "I've suspected for years that someone close to me was plotting against the crown. Now I finally have proof, but Lord Blackwood wasn't finished yet." He pulled a hidden blade from his robes and lunged toward the king. "If I can't rule this kingdom, then no one will." Elena moved to intercept him, but she wasn't the only one. Adrian burst through the throne room doors at that exact moment, having fought his way through the palace after escaping from his cell. His timing was perfect. He tackled Lord Blackwood. Just as the blade was about to reach the king, the two men rolled across the floor, fighting desperately. Lord Blackwood was skilled, but Adrian's awakening memories gave him access to techniques that few people alive could match. The battle was brief but intense, ending when Adrian managed to disarm his opponent and pin him to the ground. "It's over," Adrian said, breathing hard as palace guards rushed forward to secure Lord Blackwood. "King." William looked down at the man who had been one of his most trusted advisors. 23 years, he said sadly. "For 23 years. You've been planning my downfall while pretending to serve me faithfully," Lord Blackwood laughed bitterly. "You have no idea how many of us there are. This conspiracy reaches further than you know. Even with me gone, others will continue the work." "Then we'll find them too," Elena said firmly. "The Shadow Brotherhood was created to protect the crown from threats like this. It's time to rebuild what was destroyed." King William turned to Adrian, who was still kneeling beside the captured conspirator. "Rise, Adrian. You have served your kingdom well today, despite everything that was done to you." Adrian stood slowly, still amazed by everything that had happened. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure I deserve any praise. I don't even remember who I really am." Perhaps that's for the best, the king replied gently. You can choose who you want to be going forward. Your past was stolen from you, but your future is your own. Over the following days, the investigation continued. Lord Blackwood's arrest led to the discovery of other conspirators throughout the palace and the kingdom. Some were arrested, others fled, but the immediate threat to the crown was eliminated: Adrian's name was completely cleared, and he was offered a full pardon for any supposed crimes. More than that, he was given a choice about his future. He could return to his position in the royal guard, or he could help Elena rebuild the Shadow Brotherhood. The decision wasn't difficult. Adrian had found his purpose in protecting others, and he knew that the kingdom needed guardians who could operate in the shadows where conventional forces couldn't reach. Elena and Adrian became the founding members of a new Shadow Brotherhood, dedicated to protecting the royal family and the kingdom from threats that ordinary people would never see coming. They recruited carefully, choosing only those with unshakable loyalty and strong moral principles. The coronation ceremony proceeded as planned, but with much better security than originally intended. Adrian and Elena watched from the shadows. As King William was officially crowned, knowing that they had helped preserve the stability of the kingdom, Adrian's memories never fully returned, but he discovered that it didn't matter. He had found something more valuable than his past. He had found his purpose. The man he became was shaped not by what had been done to him, but by the choices he made going forward. Years later, when people told the story of the guard who was stripped naked in public, they spoke of it not as a tale of shame, but as the beginning of justice. Sometimes, they said, the greatest victories come from the moments when everything seems lost. Adrian's humiliation had become the catalyst. For exposing a conspiracy that could have destroyed the kingdom, Elena often reflected on how strange fate could be. The Shadow Brotherhood had been destroyed to hide a conspiracy, but its rebirth had exposed that same conspiracy to the light. The enemies who thought they had won by erasing Adrian's memories had actually created the instrument of their own. Downfall. The mark on Adrian's spine, once a symbol of a destroyed organization, became the foundation of something new and stronger. Justice had been served, and the kingdom was safe once again.